Uh, Good morning, everyone. We have a few people joining in already. Coming through. Yeah, just waiting on a few more people. Okay, guys. And now, Prasad, I'm going to ask you to make sure that everybody's on mute. Yeah. I think we might as well make a go of it. I'm not sure how to otherwise work it out, whether, you've got everybody on screen or not. This is too many buttons around here. So I'm just going to make a start of it. I'm not too sure if a lot of people have come or they haven't come. No idea. So yeah, let's go. Okay. Good morning all, and welcome to our very second webinar. The first one, we had a lot of technical difficulties. So this is the one we haven't really promoted as such. And we're just going to give it a go again. For the first webinar, we realized that we had a lot of questions. And what we've decided that we're going to do another webinar called Ask the Expert. And the first one starts this Thursday. What we're going to do there is answer your questions from that webinar and any questions that you might have had on this webinar. We're going to be sending out a link at the end of this webinar. It will be available on our website as well as to those people that have joined up on the webinar. So welcome. Firstly, let me just start with who we are. Yeah. With me, I have Irene. Irene Didi is an attention coach as part of the Attention Coach brand of companies. We have Risat. He is a staff member in Australia, and we have Lawal. He is a virtual staff member of ours in Philippines right now. The rest of us are all in Melbourne, and only Lawal is in Philippines, and he's kindly woken up very, very early for this webinar. So thanks, Lawal. Just a bit of background on us. I became an ADHD coach about 2 years ago. I have lived experience of ADHD. So very much ADHD and executive functions off the charts, guys. So yes, severe, all of the things, every bit. And that's how, and I met Irene about a year ago now, and we started collaborating, and Irene has been a life coach, and also met Dr. Jack Didi. And we all decided that, we could collaborate and come up with a situation. So now I'm going to turn it over to Irene. And Irene, you can just tell a little bit about yourself.
Hi guys, my name is Irene. I'm a life coach, interested in ADHD and learning day by day, especially hanging around with Manaj. That's very much, how shall I put this? I have no choice but to learn an enormous amount. Watching him, listening to him, and learning all the time. I'm very interested in ADHD. I think there's very little been done about it and very few people willing to listen and learn. So I'm very pleased to be here today, and I want to welcome you all and thank you all for giving us your time, which I know is very important. And possibly with so many guys with ADHD, you're running pretty late, which I understand is a very regular thing to happen. So let's kick off and we'll keep going, see how we go. Just be kind to us, please.
Oh, I'm sure they'll all be kind. So guys, as part of that, let's go towards the next part of the thing, which is going to be about, this slide is just going to talk about. So now Irene is going to talk about what is executive function. Take it away, Irene.
These are a bunch of very good looking executives, as you can see. I think so anyway, but they're not the executives we're going to talk about today. I just want to define what I think executive function is, and executive function and self-regulation skills are the mental processes that enable us to plan, focus attention, remember instructions, and juggle multiple tasks successfully. So quite a large function that most people would take for granted.
Well done, Irene. So we move on to the second part of our instance, which is Dr. Jack Teedy. Let me introduce Dr. Jack. Dr. Jack and I have been collaborating and working together in creating some medically assured models as well, which we'll probably tell you about later. But without further ado, here's Dr. Jack.
My name is Dr. Jack Teedy. I'm a family physician with over 25 years experience in general practice, with a special interest in psychological issues, including attention deficit hyperactivity disorders. I have been asked to talk about the executive function of the brain. It's an area that many people have been inquiring about recently. We've got the frontal lobe, which is in the front part of the brain. That is the newest part of our brain developmentally. It is more developed in humans than it is in any other animal, including primates. It's also the last part of the brain to mature. This is where we've got the executive center of the brain. It's like the control center, the government that runs the country, or maybe a conductor of the orchestra, where we have got many instruments, including drums and saxophone and violin and other instruments that are all very good, but when they are together, controlled, it works very, very well, and we get the symphonies. This is where we have the executive functions. This regulates things like long-term consequences that we think about, controlling impulses, making good intellectual decisions, determining the time frame for various actions, prioritizing tasks, etc. And it helps other parts of the brain to organize these things. Okay. I think it was Dr. Karl Pribram that recognized that executive function deficits were tied to ADHD. Many people with this condition have got decreased working memory, decreased motivation, planning ability, decreased self-regulation. He found that they often had struggled to analyze, struggles in planning, organizing, completing tasks, or even beginning tasks. Many times beginning many tasks at a time and not finishing any. Misplacing materials that are needed to do various tasks, unable to prioritize, and often get overwhelmed, especially with big projects.
So guys, before we get into the last part, that was Dr. Jack Teedy, and now I'm going to give you the definition from a lived experience and something that I have actually come up with. The connection between executive function, which is the control center of the brain, and ADHD is very well defined. The only way I could define it was using the D, which is dopamine or drama, because unless I use drama and get the dopamine enlarged, nothing seemed to activate. But here you go. This is how I see it. That
I think we look at the 5 signs.
yeah.
Now we look at 5 signs of poor executive functioning.
Yes, I didn't.
These would be very. That was a lovely. I love your definition. It's very graphic and it's very visual, and I think a lot of people listening here today will really identify well with it. It's good, beautiful. Anyway, the 5 signs of poor executive functioning, starting with time blindness, or an ability to plan for and keep in mind future events. Now, I mean, time to people with ADHD doesn't really exist in the normal realm of things. I mean, majority of the time they're late. A minute looking at something is actually, could be an hour. Something they decide to start in the morning may still be at lunchtime, not quite even nearly there. It's a big problem. It is a big problem. Then we come along to trouble organizing materials and setting schedules. This is something that gets in the way of a lot of people actually getting things done, work-wise, family-wise. I mean, even planning something simple as a night out at the movies can be very, very difficult. Then we come along to difficulty analysing or processing information. The way the brain processes information is totally different than the neurotypical brain, which people not knowing about this finds it quite annoying sometimes, disturbing sometimes actually, because they can't see why the ADHD person is analysing information in a way that they have no idea how they're coming up with results they're coming up with. But hey, that's the way it is. Then we have difficulty stringing together actions to meet long-term goals. I think this happens when we try too hard sometimes. We get distracted very easily. We lose interest, our motivation. And then we have, of course, the trouble controlling emotions or impulses. And this, I think, is quite concerning, especially for teens, afraid of blurting out something or being inappropriate. Sometimes they tend to be a little bit silent. And this can cause, obviously isolation, maybe even anxiety and leading on to depression. So there's 5 signs there, and 5 of them are very, well, they're very strong signs, and they're very, how would you describe them, Anesh? They're very...
they are very, very, very debilitating.
Well, they are, yes. Yes, I mean, you have all these signs. I see all these signs in you all the time. And it's hard for you. I know you find it difficult. I mean, you've worked very hard at it. And obviously you've got on top of a lot of these, which goes to show you can actually get on top of them. So if anything, you're an inspiration, I suppose. But yeah.
So I think the best way to explain this would be, when you wake up in the morning, you just jump right into whatever it is that you're doing, because that usually is now or not now. That's the standard definition as far as a lot of our people with ADHD. There's one thing that you have to remember. ADHD is one thing, and EFD, what we're talking about today, executive function, is another aspect of it. Not everybody with ADHD has the same symptoms. It is situational variability within the ADHD. Some symptoms which are really prevalent today may not be the same for me tomorrow, or may not be the same for me last week. I have no idea why that happens. And all the people that I'm meeting, all the different people with ADHD that we meet as we go along, the studies that we're doing, that we're reading about, it doesn't seem to be the same thing on a daily basis. Some days are just perfect and they seem to just blend in. And then at the end of the day, you go, that worked really well. Whereas the next day, I can't get out of bed. I just don't want to. I just don't feel like it. I don't want to, and I don't need to. So I go back to sleep sometimes these days, not all the time. But that's where executive function kicks in. It's also not the same for everyone. It does not react the same for everyone. It does not mean that just because you can't activate one day, there's no way you can activate. There are lots and lots of things that actually go together. When we are talking about difficulty analyzing or processing information. They're talking about working memory.
Mm-hmm.
Tasks.
That's where you have a problem, really, isn't it, with the visual working memory? That's quite a big issue. Yeah.
That's absolutely right. So I'm just going to start with the last part of it, and let's go into it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
As we go into the next slide.
It is important to get the best medication that is needed to control the symptoms, and also important to have good habits to decrease anxiety levels. Having a good diet, especially rich in protein and natural vegetables, helps to increase the building blocks. Exercise helps to increase the natural endorphins. Meditation, very useful for relaxation. Socialization helps to increase the oxytocin levels. We're unfortunately missing very much in socialization over the last 6 months or so with lockdown, but hopefully this will be improved. Psychology to help to regulate emotions, and life coaching is very helpful and essential to optimize life and to better keep on track. Hopefully this will be of some benefit, and looking forward to catching up next time. In the meantime, keep safe and look forward to next time seeing you.
So guys, that was my ADHD in play, because I'm the one in charge of this presentation and I was trying to get it right. And that's video probably should have gone up to the end of the presentation, but I put it here. And once I'd done it, I did not know how to take it out this morning, so I just left it. Yeah.
It's fine. It's one of those oops moments we have all the time.
Well, that's what you're going to do about it, moments, right?
Yeah.
We move to the next basic one, which we're talking about executive function here. The two main models, which are the gold standard. One, which was proposed by Dr. Barkley, and one, which was proposed by Dr. Brown. Yeah. So Dr. Barkley and Dr. Brown both come from a different perspective, but just to give you a basic understanding of, these are still, what we're still using are the medical terms. So yes, Irene, I'll let you take away the Dr. Brown model, Dr. Barkley's model, where he talks about using self-regulation.
Yeah, they're both very good, but they're both very different. 6 executive functions to self-regulate. We've got self-awareness, where we try and be more self-aware of what's happening in the moment. Visual imagery, which we try to call on, which is kind of difficult for people with ADHD. So it's something we recall. Well, most people can just recall it easily. You guys seem to have more of an issue with it. Talking to yourself, it happens and it's good and it's something we encourage, but maybe not so much out loud. Yeah, well, whatever. Self-restraint, I suppose that's got the impulsivity and the need to sometimes blurt things out without actually meaning to, using your mouth before you use your head. Regulating emotions, a big one here. I think, Manoj, you would say that probably out of all of them, that would be the biggest. Would you agree there?
Absolutely. So what actually here we are trying to, in a nutshell, what Dr. Barkley believes is that we can use self-awareness, self-restraint, and we can use different parts of self-regulation once we learn them. So he's talking about a very scientific-based model, which is using CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy as well. What we're talking about is you become aware of your actions and triggers when you are going down the path. When you become aware of something and you're actually self-aware of that going to happen, you can actually put a pause in at that particular point in time.
That's about creating a routine, isn't it, Manoj? About creating a routine. And your routine eventually becomes, well, something you depend on. And these things can be learned.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So this is what they're talking about. Now, as you said, regulating emotions is probably the hardest part. It is learned experience. It is the emotions of shame. It is the emotion of our behavior patterns that we have learned as people with ADHD throughout our lives. It becomes a cue, it becomes available on a trigger. To
Well,
regulate
this is the sad thing, yeah. The belief system is kind of made when they're younger, or it's developed, I should say, and even one word, one look, one sound can just send them straight into a different moment of time, which can stop everything. Yeah. Yeah.
So Irene, you're absolutely right. It is trigger. Trigger links to an association. The association goes back to a certain point in time, which is whatever it is, the memory. So when we're talking about somebody with somebody who may have attentional issues or may have AFD, which is executive function dysfunction, as it is known in some instances,
Yeah.
at a certain trigger, it could be sound, it could be incorporating any of our five senses, right? It could be smell, sound, whatever. An external trigger recreates a memory, and on cue, the freeze flight response comes up, and instantly it is perceived maybe as a threat, maybe as any other thing, but the habit sorts of triggers off a sense of emotion, and it can lead to overwhelm.
And I think as well too that people with ADHD, they're very emotionally driven.
Absolutely.
So I mean, they usually make decisions based on emotion rather than on logic.
Absolutely.
And this is sometimes, yeah, where they get into a lot of trouble.
But what actually causes that? There are many schools of thought that are going along with it. But one of the theories that that is going at the moment is that if you're talking about ADHD, it is a deficit. When you're talking about deficit, it may be a lack of dopamine. When there's a lack of dopamine, your body wants you to create it. And when you want to create it, sometimes we can use drama to create it for want of another thing. This is not true for everyone. But
yeah, absolutely, or even some risk taking.
Yes, adrenaline and drama. So there's more than one neurochemical that goes into it. We're talking about dopamine, we're talking about adrenaline, we're talking about norepinephrine.
Mm-hmm.
However, mostly we're talking about the negativity that surrounds it. When we're talking about the negativity, there's more negative thoughts that come into an ADHD person's mind than would be a neurotypical person at any given point in time.
Yeah, I think they're the ones that I have come across, the people with ADHD that I've spoken to. They're very sensitive, highly sensitive,
Absolutely.
without actual needs sometimes, and this is why the rejection syndrome seems to hit them so much more than the rest of us neurotypical people.
That's correct.
So,
And
yeah.
we're talking about specifically RST, but we'll get into that in a minute.
Yes,
So
yes, that's another big subject. Yeah, yeah. Okay.
We're just going to move on to the next part, which is going to be Dr. Brown's model.
Different again.
It is, yes. Dr. Brown actually believes that while ADHD is conscious, it can be a learned emotion. And this is what he talks about. He talks about these are the 6 actions which, sorry guys, 1 second. I'm just trying to adjust things on my screen and I can't see a damn thing right now. So, yeah, okay. So we've got organizing, activation. You then need focus. Moving on to effort, managing emotion, memory, and action. We're just going to talk about briefly about a couple of these things that we are and how I can actually tag lived experience of what we are actually talking about, because we need a series of these tasks done. Now let's take something. If you want to complete a project, task 1, task 2, task 3, done in a linear, straightforward capacity, one task after another, at the right time, at the right place, leads to a completed goal. When you have ADHD, you start by the morning going, what was it? It's a blank slate. Every time I woke up, I did not know what my next action was. So it's like, I don't know. What was it that I'm supposed to do? Can somebody tell me? It's not that I can't do it, because once I start on it, I would be able to do it. So we usually just react to triggers around us. Yeah. So having a look at all of these, when you're talking about activation, you're talking about focus, effort. If you've got one project that we are doing, probably it's okay if that's all that we have to do. But if you've got to do multiple projects that you're doing at any given time, and at the same time in a calendar, you've got 6 things that you have to do today. Um, Sometimes you can actually start doing the thing, but then how do you stop doing that?
Or how do you stop being distracted?
That's right. How do you organize, prioritize, and activate to work? So activation is igniting and getting things going.
And you'll only activate if you feel motivated, right?
That's right. And you can feel motivated. This is where hyperfocus comes in. You can get motivated to the point that you can't stop. Focus is about not only being able to focus on the task on hand, but it is also being able to stop focusing on a task when you need to stop.
Mm-hmm.
Effort is probably the hardest part. At this point in time, I don't want to do something. Time management is a very hard thing. It's very easy for me to plan my calendar. I'm one of the best people at planning and strategy, as most ADHD people are. Planning and strategy, great. But when it comes
Fabulous.
to time,
Actually, you're one of the best planners I know.
yeah, but implementing it is not that easy. Implementing
No.
it, because when it comes to that time, when I have put down that I need to prepare for the webinar in 2 weeks' time, all I want to do is watch Friends on TV,
Yeah.
for the rest of the day, because that's what I want to do right now.
Mm.
So that would take precedence quite possibly. Or if there's another shiny new thing, I will not be able to stop, or I can stop. Yeah. Whereas anybody else will be able to see it. So we can't see reward at the end of your task.
It's a little bit like what I was talking about yesterday about somebody wanting to go and have a shower. And on their way to the shower, they realise they've left their running shoes on. And say, oh gosh, I can't wear the running shoes inside, so we better take those off. And when you take off your running shoes, you realise, gosh, the podiatrist, did I make that appointment? I'll be good, I'll do it, I'll phone them now, I'll ring them now, make the appointment. And you do, and you're feeling really good about this, and you hear maybe a Tina Turner belting out a song, and you're thinking, oh, this brings me back, and you're dreaming about where you were when you heard that song, and next thing you hear somebody saying hello, and you're, like you say about getting distracted, it's, yeah, hello, who are you? You wanted to make an appointment? Oh, yes, back to the podiatrist. So you do make the appointment, and you're quite happy that you've made the appointment, but you look at your watch and it's time to go to work, and you never got to have that shower. It's all these little things, isn't it? These are the little things I'm finding that's fascinating me, how everything that gets in the way. Great intentions, but yeah.
Absolutely. Totally. I can give you the best story that I've ever heard of in this one, Irene, was by this gentleman who actually finished work.
Mm-hmm.
He quit his job, and he was a senior executive for a Wall Street firm in the US. He actually quits his job, and he's gone to his family because now he's going to write his bestseller, which he's always wanted to do. He was extremely good at his work because he had a system sorted out at work, which could just help him thrive. Yeah. So he had secretaries, everything was done. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
This is what happens the very first day. He's sitting in his kitchen, and his wife says to him, this is a true story, by the way, guys. This is what we heard at the last ADHD World Conference. So, and this is the gentleman who told us, was the guy. This is exactly what happened. The wife said, oh, would you mind just going to the service station and picking up some bread, because that's not that far away, because we have other people coming. He actually gets into his car and drives up to the service station and starts filling in the fuel. And at this point, he walks into the servo to buy that loaf of bread. When he gets to the servo, he meets a mate who actually starts talking to him, and he's extremely animated at this point in time, and he's talking about how he's just quit his job and all that. So his mate's talking there to him, and he's chatting away to him like being filled. The next thing his mate says, I'm actually, if you got nothing else to do, I'm heading off to fishing. And he's like, great, let's go. Actually, he gets into the car with him and goes to him and they start driving to wherever they are driving to. It was apparently upstate New York. They reach this fishing venue. That's an hour later. And the mate stops the car and he realizes, he goes, I don't know why I'm here. And then he realizes that he left the car still with the fuel attached to it. His mate looks at him in horror and says, that surely can't be true. I thought you walked up because you lived right next door. He goes, that's exactly what it is. We need to go back. By this time, it's been an hour and a half since he has left his home. His wife, obviously, is extremely worried, has phoned the police, who reached the service station and suspect something has gone wrong. By the time this man gets back, the cops are there. Everybody is looking out for him. And this is exactly the series of events that actually happened. All that
I can believe it. Yes, I've had some people tell me stories like that. It starts out one way and it ends up like a total and utter, very relatable and very much a story you can tell later on, but at the time, soul destroying.
So even sometimes when you're talking about planning and you're talking about doing these things seem to get into the way of whatever the thing is. It's not only about inhibiting yourself. When you're talking about focusing, sustaining, and shifting attention to a task, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not only about inhibition. It's the impulsivity, which has got the two sides to it, right? But they all are different aspects of these emotions.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about monitoring self-regulation, frustration, working memory, and accessing recall. Working memory is a very strong aspect of it. However, to do this particular thing justice, I was trying to come up with a webinar which I thought could talk about everything. And we decided that it's too big a topic to cover in one webinar, and especially with people with ADHD. So we were just going to be talking about how the different models today, the Barkley model as well as the Brown model, play out. What we
Well,
were
they both complicate each other. They both kind of complement each other, don't they? Really.
Sorry,
Oh, here we go. I'm going wrong again.
Yes, I know.
He's insisting on coming back.
And as you can see, my ADHD kicked in and I could not.
You couldn't stop that, could you? You had to keep going.
I couldn't find the button to keep going, even though it's a track.
I love this. We're living it. We're actually living it. We're not just talking about it.
But we do live it because as soon as, so there's the dichotomy of ADHD, yeah? You put pressure on yourself and you can't do it. But we live our lives constantly with that feeling inside, which is the central nervous system, which talks about that pressure. It's that build-up. It's that anxiety. A lot of people can't put a finger on it. I mean, I think for you guys, it's very difficult sometimes to actually understand what it is that we are trying to do, but it feels.
I know what you're talking about, the anxiety and all that, and I agree with you. I've seen it, but I must admit your ability to get over something just like that went wrong for that second or whatever. A lot of people would be absolutely devastated, but for you guys, it's like, well, next, bring it on. What's going to happen now? You know, you often say, I'm going to say sorry now because I'll have to say it later on. So I'm going to say it at the beginning of the conversation. I've heard this said before. But you get over things much faster than I would, which is wonderful to see. And that's an ability I'd love to have. You know, we're talking about all these things that sound dreadful, but there's so many wonderful things with ADHD as well, too. Absolutely. I mean, the absolute joy you guys have. Love it. It's infectious.
At the moment, my two lovely assistants don't seem to be very joyful. They're about, Risat looks like it's about to collapse. Yeah. And so does Lowell back there. So guys, I started with working with Lowell because my coach of the time, which is about 3 years ago, told me that it's a really good idea to get a virtual assistant. And over the years, I think Lowell has probably smashed the computer a few times on me, and so have I. I do know that Risata started only with us about 3 months ago because I needed somebody who's more organized, who can implement stuff. And he just could not understand why we do things the way we do things. And even though he keeps asking me, he's very, very patient. He keeps asking me what we need to do. I keep changing my mind about a lot of things because everything else seems more brighter. But we're getting there. And there are lots of times when I think he's about to talk it. He's not supposed to work today, but eventually I did talk him into working today. Isn't that right, Rasat? So yeah, we'll just leave it at that. Anyway. All right, guys, I'm just going to go up to the next part of this, Irene, which is what we were talking about. What we're talking here, the difference between Brown, the models between Brown and Barkley, yeah?
Mm-hmm. It's the conscious choice is really the main difference between them, isn't it?
Correct.
Yeah.
But I believe both of them, and self-awareness, right? I believe that both of them working together is the right way to do this. Yes, we can create habits. Yes, we need regulations, but self-awareness and knowing who we are is very important, because ADHD, EFD, any of these Ds, whatever you want to call them, are only one side of the equation. Who you are as a human being is just as important in the medical model or any other kind of model than what these things actually do. And how each one of these things play out is completely different in each one of us.
Nobody is the same. No two people are the same. And what works for one may not work for another. But I think you just find what works for you. It's a personal journey, really, for everybody. That's what we've found so far, isn't it?
Absolutely. And what we really cannot do more of is figure out who we are as human beings. Yes, there are very important tasks that we need to do, but are they really that important? Is one of the questions that when you actually sit down and ask, and when you pause it. So even though you know everything, you can actually work out your systems. I can see a lot in other people, but I can't see it in me. I always need my own coach. I can't see that in me even after years of practice sometimes, right? If it comes to a time when everything is going perfectly, but what does happen, and this is just personal lived experiences, that it becomes easier. Your days become easier. So not every day is as bad as the last.
I think though as well, Manoj, because you've had so much experience and you've decided to learn about this and put a lot of things into action, you're kinder to yourself. And I think that's what a lot of ADHD people aren't. They're not very kind. They don't show a lot of self-compassion. And they beat themselves up so much. It's unbelievable. And I think that's where we start sometimes, is just with self-compassion.
Exactly. That's exactly where we probably need to start with, and we should be starting with the sense of the shame that is there. So guys, now we're just going to go into looking at what we're talking about for the next part, which is going to be the again.
He's back again.
Yeah. No. So then he's back again, and we're talking about the executive series. So what we thought of was that as part of ADHD Awareness Month, I don't know whether we'll be able to play it all out, all these webinars in the ADHD Awareness Month, but we are going to create each one of the executive functions because they're quite big. Activation, organizing, planning as a separate webinar, and we will simply play them back. So we will start again the same time probably next week, or maybe a slightly different time. But
I think that's in small bites. I think that's easier to see if we just do it in small bites, and not make it very complicated, and maybe make it a little bit fun, because you guys are fun people.
Yep. And what we're going to do is, as part of it, we're going to invite one person with lived experience as well to come and talk about it to us as part of these webinars. Yeah. And we're going to invite one medical person. So one medical person, one lived experience person, and activation, planning, prioritizing. Now, these are the promises I'm making with my total typical ADHD self. It might be, there is no timeline as far as I'm concerned. We'll try and have the one next week or the week after.
I will try and keep him on the straight and narrow. That's my promise to those of you who are listening. And we will come up with something pretty special, I'm sure.
I'm sure we will. So now we are going to go to the last part. These are the ones that we are going to be focusing on.
Yeah.
As what we are looking at, all the ones that are coming up. And now I'm going to stop sharing the screen, and I don't know how again. Sorry, guys. And I will probably open it out for Q&A. Yeah. So Risat, you want to start the Q&A, mate? Or do I need to start it? Okay, yeah. And
it started.
It has started, is it?
Yes.
Okay, so if anybody has any questions, please feel free to ask. And we will take it from there. So there is also, I have got one question already from, I will not name them. I can shake off, the question says this, I can shake off stuff-ups quickly and easily, but I can also ruminate over these stuff-ups later for hours, days, and feel sickened by them. It is a big effort to get over them sometimes. Irene, do you want to take that?
Oh my God, the rumination is just shocking. It's somebody described it as a smelly dog just following you around constantly. And you just can't get rid of the smell. Just can't get rid of this dog. It's just there the whole time. You wake up in the morning with that feeling in the pit of your stomach. And it's something that can be worked on, definitely. We can work out a system to put that dog in the laundry and maybe put a gate there that you can go back and see him. You know he's there, but he doesn't have to be following you around the place. But I mean, you'd agree with that as well, Manoj. It happens a lot of people.
They call it the ADHD tornado. They call it the ADHD tornado.
Yeah.
Rumination. What is rumination? Rumination is repeating the same cycle over and over and over, even though we might know it. Sometimes we are aware of what the triggers are and what it is, but we are going to get worried and get caught in a loop. Yeah.
I think sometimes you can get addicted to it, can't you?
Yes.
It can almost be an addiction because it gives you something. It gives you something to think about as well too. It's almost like a rush of dopamine, the rumination, because it's something else. It gets your attention.
Absolutely there. So there's two kinds of neurochemicals, right? We are talking about dopamine, but we're also talking about oxytocin, adrenaline, cortisol. Cortisol is considered to be the stress hormone, and it's not necessarily always bad. Cortisol mixed with adrenaline usually gives us an activation trigger to get you going. Yeah. But it's in a small capacity. But when you flood your body with cortisol, it keeps going up, 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 up. It is an addiction because it's your body feeding off the drama, constant need, right? Like, let's do it, let's do it, let's do it. So yes, it's a loop. But the best part of that is it's a habit. Not that easy. Not that straightforward. However, it is a habit and we can learn to break it. Now, the best part about somebody with ADHD is if you have a way that you can stop at that particular point in time and start thinking about something else, it doesn't take very long for the shiny thing to become brighter. And
that's what I mean. You shake that off as well too eventually. Yeah.
But it's not that easy. It is a learned habit, and rumination is a very strong, and it is a deliberating. I have somebody who's just asked us. I think we should actually do a separate one on rumination and the impact of shame as well. Yeah, so that's part of one of the webinar series that we can do, rumination, because that is something that we really need to do as part of the emotional dysregulation. The word what I'm looking for, emotional dysregulation series. So there's somebody who's asked us a question right now. How do you differentiate between ADHD and ADD? Okay. The definition of ADHD is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. The definition is attention deficit disorder. I don't believe that either of these definitions are correct anymore as such across the board. However, these are the definitions that we have. There are three kinds of ADHD given the gold standard. Again, there are so many different models out there as to what the label is. So, for want of a better word, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, it was always thought in the past that people, and it was seen mostly in children, and it was thought that everybody had to be hyperactive. Then they found out what was called the inattentive ADHD, ADD. Yes, and that seemed to be more in women as well in the recent years. For whatever reason, guys, the world that we live in, everything is male-centric. So why should the ADHD world be any different? Yeah. Mm-hmm. What happens? Most of the studies that were done were for young boys. It was only later when they found out how much inattentive ADHD and the attentional issues caused by ADHD, what it was doing to women, that has come up in the light more and more now.
There's been more and more research, hasn't there been more and more research really, and with that research they've changed different names and things like that too.
But they haven't yet decided on a standard definition, because well, at the moment what we have is ADD and slash ADHD. However, none of these two actual definitions can define the disorder because of the situational variability and the length and the breadth of the symptoms as they attack people, or some people just call it a neurodevelopment disorder. Yeah. I have come to the conclusion that I gave up in the end, and I just simply call it the D principle. What is the D? Yeah, it's just part of the D, ADHD. So yeah, okay, it's the D. Is it a disease? Is it a disorder? It is a dysregulation. Just call it the D. How does your D impact you? Is what I believe. A D is also what we need for doctor. It is also the D what we need, which is the best practice of ADHD, which is drugs. It is also the D of what we need, which is the desire, which causes the dopamine. It is also the D, which is the deficit of dopamine. ADHD, it's not knowing what to do. It is actually doing it. There's your difference between the inattention and that. Most people with ADHD know exactly what to do every single day. Yeah. It's being able to implement it at the time or at point of performance, which becomes hard. Okay, I've got another question coming up here. I'm not really sure what that means, but okay, I'll give it a go. So how do you create what is the definition of EFD and why would it be a dysregulation? Is that right? Okay. Executive function deficits are what we were talking about today, the control center of the brain itself. It's all the tasks done in a series of questions. And the dysregulation is when we can't do those tasks as and when we need to, in a sequence, in a logical manner. That defines it. Hope that answers the questions, guys.
We can have more questions that ask the expert as well too.
Yep. So we'll definitely take on board more of your questions, guys. Anything else that you need, yeah, please feel free to take it from there. And I did promise that this one I'm going to try and keep to the timeline that we decided with this particular event. So I think we're going to talk a bit more about shame as well, because some people seem to be asking about that as well. So Irene, did you want to take away a little bit on shame and how?
Oh my goodness, I wouldn't know where to start with shame. I think maybe we can do a webinar, especially on women and shame. I think I'd be interested in doing that. Absolutely. I think the shame element in women is much higher than in men. So yeah, I'll promise I'll do a little webinar on that by itself. That'll be enough on a whole webinar, I would imagine. Yeah, I just think it's a legacy of ADHD, isn't it? Shame really is. So yeah.
Okay, guys. We are going to be sending out our link for the Ask the Expert series at the end of this. Please feel free to email us with any questions, and we hope to see you on the Thursday for Ask the Expert, where we'll be answering questions based on today and yesterday, our last webinar as well. And we are going to take it from there. So thank you all very much for coming, and thank you, Risat and Lawal, for putting up with me with this webinar as well. Thanks, guys. Thank you very much. And Lawal, you can go back to sleep now, mate. Sorry. Yeah. Your day off. And Risat, you can actually have your Sunday off. I'm sorry, buddy, again. But thanks for turning up today, man. And thank you very much, Irene.
Thank you, Manish. Lovely chatting. And we'll catch up soon. And I hope people, even if you got a tiny bit of something out of today, I'll be really, really happy. And until we meet again, stay safe and look after each other.
I've got one quick question coming from Rachel. You find it is, we might as well take it, Irene.
Okay.
You find it is associated with anxiety? The answer to you, Rachel, is yes. Anxiety is that feeling that we were talking about, which is there, and probably when you don't have a GPS or a set system, there's always that constant feeling inside, which lifts up the anxiety, and that is when the emotional dysregulation is happening, right?
Yeah.
Anxiety can be caused as a lot of different things. It could be part of depression. There could be an actual medical reason, which we don't really get into, other than help you find the right doctor to talk about it. But what we're talking about here is that there is that constant feeling of anxiety. There's something not quite right. There's something missing. There's something happening. Am I forgetting? Am I not doing what I'm supposed to do? It is that feeling that we live with. However, when we use our strengths and we go on the other side, the anxiety does lessen. Anxiety is, one way of looking at it is the cortisol. The other way of looking at it is increasing the dopamine, hopefully, and the other chemicals. There could be a very valid reason for anxiety as well, which is a medical reason, right? So the medical reasons could be because of a comorbidity with ADHD. Several exist, and then those are the ones that you'd have to speak to your doctor about, or a psychiatrist, because they're the ones, they're the right D, they're the right doctor who got the right degree D, who actually reach there.
I think possibly to manage with us, I agree 100% with what you're saying, but probably with us getting somebody to know their strengths with ADHD, I think that would alleviate some anxiety at least. And I don't think people realize that they can actually go in and find out what their strengths are. There's availability to do that. And I think when people start working on their strengths, they're working with themselves rather than against themselves. And I think for somebody with anxiety, along with everything else, depending on where the anxiety is actually coming from, that would be certainly a starting point.
Absolutely. But
Yeah.
anxiety and ADHD go hand in hand.
Yeah.
It's constant. Anxiety can be constant. Anxiety can be an external trigger. The anxiety can simply be seeing other people. It is the fear of other people's opinions. It is so much more than just what anxiety is. Anxiety could be a result of trauma. And they are now finding that trauma and ADHD, the learned behaviors, there's so much research happening. We are really lucky in a way to live in a country which is at the forefront of a lot of the stuff that is happening in the ADHD world at the moment. That is what I believe. I really do believe that.
We just have to get rid of a lot of that judgment that's around it, I think.
Absolutely. Rachel has brought out a very, sorry, Rachel, I did mention your name, apologies, but you bring out a very good point where Rachel just said that it could be part of suffering from mental health, social anxiety. Yes, exactly. It is fear of other people's opinion. It could be the fact that socially we don't want to go out because we've learned over the years it doesn't work. It's not just about going and being able to be an extrovert and talking about it. It is about when you go there, what are they saying? What does it look like? How do I manage to make my day so that it doesn't bother me? But that's, in theory, very easy. But when it becomes such a large part of your life.
Well, I think a lot of people too believe that even overhearing a word with their name in it feel that somebody may have been talking about them, which may not be true at all, but they have such a low self-esteem that everything gets much bigger than it actually is, and suddenly there's a big fire. You know what I mean? So yeah, it's all encapsulated in that, I suppose.
So, I mean, you're absolutely right. It may not be true in the real world, but to that person at that particular point in time, it is the most truest event that is there.
It's their reality at the time, yes. And they take it personally, very much so.
Well, there's no other way. As far as I'm concerned, there's no other way to take it, man. Yeah. It is personal because it is happening to me. How much more personal can it be? If it's not happening to me, then it is not personal. But it is happening to me. I'm feeling it.
Yeah.
It is intensely personal. It is extremely personal. And maybe it's not right by blaming other people, but hey, at that point in time, I do want to blame, so I do.
Yeah, you don't care.
Not really that, but yeah. So, all right, guys, thank you very much for your questions and everything, and we'll definitely get back to you all and we'll start the Ask the Expert series for this week as well. So please do spread the word about ADHD awareness, as this is ADHD Awareness Month. And yep, thank you. And we shall see you on Thursdays or Sundays next week for the other webinars. Thanks, guys. All right.
Bye-bye.